Art is painful actually, because the creating process makes you ill mostly, because your brain is working and everything made before. If you check a little bit on the Google, you can see everything almost created before, and that's why you are just feeling like you are copying the people in the old times. My name is Barış Kareli. I'm a sculptor, special effects maker in film industry, mostly in film industry. 80 years old, human feet. You can see the details on it. Socks more woman's hand, 8 years old. I have 2 different university degrees. My first degree was chemical engineering, and then I quit and decided to study fine arts. I passed the exams and I became a sculptor. I graduated from the sculpting department from Turkey, and then adventure begins, The clay form of the model that we start here. It's a negative copy of the clay model that we made. After this process, we are casting different materials inside, This one is for the hand casting. It's a little bit harder than the regular human skin. This one, you can feel that. This one is also same, like the real human skin. Sometimes we are casting solid materials as well, or foamish materials for the movies, Sometimes someone wants to throw an actor's, something to the head. That's why we are casting different materials. You can see some solid materials as well. These are also looks realistic, but human skin has 8% transparency. Solid materials can't get that light in. That's why the silicone is a transparent material. We are putting some pigment in it and leaving 80% transparency to make it look like more like skin. Final process is the painting process. Also, we are sometimes using brush or airbrush. It's all about the purpose of the work that you made. If you are making a work as an art purpose, you can become a fine art artist. But if you are making it for a movie, you're a special effects maker, because they're using that for a reason. Art can't have a reason. Art is something you create with your emotions, and then you are just putting it on a gallery. If someone wants it, they can buy, but the main reason to create that art is for your emotions, not for sale. Before the Joker movie, I saw the trailers, and then I decided to make a small-scale model. Latest dragon that I made. Yeah, you can see textures. It's all about your experience and the knowledge on the material. You should get the material and try, fail, and finding your way to do it best. Because every process needs to its own perfection. Because in the end, you are looking for an hyper-realistic object. That means there is no place for a mistake or any dot that doesn't need to be there. That's why all the process has to be perfect, and every step needs its own practice, experience with the different materials. Because as I told you can make the same model with various materials. You can use a solid material and get a solid result, and it's all what you are expecting. What's the purpose of the model that you made. If it's an outside model, you should cast it with a material that stands outside. The silicone is not that. Actually, this is for inside. Actually, it's not a hyper-realistic model. Yeah, it's a kind of stylized model. Right now it's wet, that's why I can't touch. Unpainted version of the same model. Designed actually, not anatomically realistic. It's just a regular heart shape, like with the pointy bottom. You should make someone exactly how he looks. And in the different times, everyone looks different. And you should find a look that everyone thinks that person is he or she. You know, that's your challenge in the modeling stage. And then you should make the textures perfect and get the mold perfect, because the negative is halfway of your result. And also you should cast the material without any fault. That's why we are using vacuum chambers and pressure tanks to make the material as possible as bubble free and mixed well. Previous works, you can see this is a negative of a head, a child head. This one is a woman, I guess. Yeah, this one is bottom. This is a reptile feet mold. This is a hammer. You know, we are casting them in with a soft material, like a foam, expandable foam. I inspired with lots of artists from history, mostly in ancient ages, because their challenge was totally different than us, because they didn't have any technologic tools like us, you know, chemicals, wax-based clays or anything else. You know, they just had something and they create their best with that material and that tools. And they created really amazing stuff with nothing, basically. That's why it's a huge inspiration for me. It was a huge inspiration for me. But then after I graduated from sculpting department, I tried to find my way, and that time I met with Ron Mueck. He's also an old artist, but newer than the traditional sculptors. I saw he creates really hyper-realistic and oversized sculptures into the closed spaces, and like the giant figures and stuck and squeezed in a room kind of sculptures he created. No one can say, you know, he's not an artist. He creates something that no one can do. These are the tiniest reptile eyes that I have. And this one, the biggest, mammal eyes. And this one is a goat eye. Hyperrealism is run away from fine arts for me. You know, the fine arts is something that you should do with your emotions, but the hyperrealism is something that you should copy exactly. You can't add anything on it. You should just copy what exactly you see. You can change the pose, change the expression, but the skin and face and eyes and everything must look exactly realistic as the real, you know, in real world. That's why it was something that has also its own challenge, and you can just tell your story with something really looks realistic. You know, you don't need to make an expressionist art, you know, that doesn't look anything but make you feel something. I just wanted to run away from this and find hyperrealism in my art. Yeah, this is just a fun job, I can say, and also a criticism to the big companies. You know, you can see the human skin on a big brand can. You can see the transparency in the thin parts. And that's also an art purpose work that I made. It was about the animal skin that the big companies are, you know, big textile companies are using the real animal skins, and it was something to protest that. It's a human bag, you know. If you really want to use a real skin, use your own. Art is painful actually, because the creating process makes you ill mostly, because your brain is working and, you know, everything made before. You know, if you check a little bit on the Google, you can see everything almost created before, and that's why you are just feeling like you are copying the people in the old times, and that makes you sick, you know, feel sick basically. And then when I find out hyperrealism, it's something that you should make exactly the same, you know, you don't need to add something on it. Then, you know, when you figure it out to make it hyperrealistic, then you can add expressions, you can add your emotions in it. But in the first place, you should be a master on it. And that's my process, you know. At the same time, I can work, I can earn money with that, you know, with my art, not art, commissional art. But also I'm keep doing my thing, you know. Eventually I will start, you know, expressing my emotions in my art, then maybe I can become a fine artist. I think it's the periods of your life it's about, you know, everybody is a little bit expressionist in their lifetime, you know. Some people expressionist in their high school, you know, as a feeling, I mean. And I will find my way in the end, you know, maybe 10 years later, maybe 20 years later, I'm not sure. Right now, I'm happy with doing something really realistic, looks really realistic. Because when people saw it, they directly think, you know, how detailed, how hard work is it. There was a torture scene, and, you know, the electricity goes through to the genitals in the torture scenes, and, you know, that clips hurts too much. That's why we created some extensions for the actors' genitals to put the clip on. And that was my first hyperrealistic job in film industry, actually. And then, you know, everything went crazy.